Welcome to Why Not Change the World, the RPI podcast. I'm Reeve Hamilton. On this episode, we're going to do something different. We're going to listen in on a conversation with two very special guests that was recorded at a dinner event at the Village Pub in Woodside, California in May of 2019. It was moderated by Shekhar Garde, the Dean of Engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I'll let him introduce the guest.
Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Martian Edward Ted Hoff Jr., electrical engineering class of 1958. He's known as the father of the microprocessor. Intel advertisement called him a rock star. And he is. He has a long list of awards, and I won't want to go through, but I'll tell you that he was the first Intel Fellow. In 1996, he was inducted in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. And in 2009, President Barack Obama honored him with the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. So Ted, it's a pleasure to welcome you. Another rock star here is Mr. Curtis R. Priam, electrical engineering class of 1982. As you all know, Curtis is the inventor of the graphics processor, which has changed the world. He's also co-founder and former CTO of the NVIDIA Corporation. He was a member of Board of Trustees of RPI from 2003 to 2007, and currently he is the Secretary of the Board of Trustees since 2016. Curtis Priam has more than 200 patents, US and international, to his name. And he is one of the strongest supporters, strongest cheerleaders, strongest friend that Rensselaer can have. So Curtis, thank you very much for being here.
This is Reeve again. As you can probably tell, the audio quality is admittedly less than ideal, but it's a rare treat to hear from these two accomplished inventors. We'll actually join in at the end of a long conversation, the full version of which can be found on SoundCloud, as they both look to the future, prompted by this question from Shekhar to Ted Hoff.
I know that the audience will have lots of questions about what is the future like, or did you anticipate your inventions to grow exponentially and change the world? I'm going to spare those questions, but I'll ask you one question. Curtis mentioned that we have 20,000 applications and 1,700 young people come to Rensselaer, thinking about the future. If one of them were here in front of you, what would be your advice to them?
Well, right now, I'm mostly concerned about the planet. And it seems to me that if you look at the human population, it grew by roughly a factor of 4 in the last century. And it's growing at that rate today. We are also increasing the standard of living in many parts of the world, which means their use of energy is going up. And to the extent that we burn fossil fuels to create that energy, we are adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And indications are it's already having an impact on such as thinning the polar ice caps. And people say, well, but the oceans will absorb the excess carbon dioxide. That may be true, but it's affecting coral reefs, which are really part of the food chain of those populations that depend highly on seafood for their protein. So one of the areas I think that we need to be looking at, how do we break our habit of generating energy by dumping garbage into the atmosphere, which is basically what we're doing? Can we come up with systems that basically don't change the content of our oceans and our atmosphere? And that, I think, needs to be one of the biggest areas. And I would think that the people who solve that will end up having a very positive economic outcome.
This brings us full circle to your Westinghouse competition project, taking CO2 plus. Right. Curtis, what is your message to incoming students?
I mean,
Yeah.
we'll just sort of probably finish off on this tone. I'm actually moving in the direction of actually caring about the planet a lot more. And it's through actually where we live, we've been off the grid for 12 years. No electricity, no Ethernet, no cell phone, no sewage, no water. We have a landline connected up for emergency reasons. But we have a very nice house. We're having to live in the style that everybody else does, and we have to create everything from scratch. And so, because I'm an engineer, I can measure everything. So like in the last 12 years, we're now approaching 2.1 million pounds of CO2 we have dumped into the air just from our liquid propane generator. And we have to replace the generator. It was funny, we were on a conference call, and Ted actually had to take off because they were going to deliver a generator, and it's like, and it's 12-week wait time on generators, and PG&E is going to make it worse. But anyway, I got caught up in this whole belief system of, let's use batteries, like cars and stuff. And we have a UPS system that runs the house, so when we switch between generators, the diesel and liquid propane, you can't even tell. And so it's like we had a big battery bank, and it only lasted 10 months, and then it died, and then it cost $15,000 to replace the batteries. And that started me on my journey of actually figuring out where all, what's happening in the energy area. And it comes down to, it's like, in the very first Tesla car, it actually, if you include replacing the batteries, it's about 5 miles per gallon. My H1 Hummers get 10 miles per gallon. Because we don't actually look at how much energy is actually being burnt around the world to keep us in the lifestyle that we have. And so I'll just leave you with, the conclusions of this 12-year path, which is take your salary, your income for your family, and you can divide by 3. And that's basically how many gallons of fuel you're burning somewhere in the world to support your lifestyle. Or in other words, multiply by 4, that's how many pounds of CO2 your family is putting into the environment. So I don't think that all these technologies are not like the microprocessor in silicon where it doubles every 18 months, and we can actually work our way out of this with technology. It's the arrogance of the United States that we are going to export all our pollution to the rest of the world, to the people under the poverty line, that is actually really, really causing harm to the world. And what we have to start doing is start looking at what we are doing in our own country. And the sad part about it is it will come back to, if we're going to save this planet, we need to limit our population and limit our population. We need to take it back. We can cut our population in half, and we'll just take it back to where we were in 1972. And that's not good enough for it to survive. So I wish technology was the answer, but I think technology is the way that we're going to learn how bad this situation is, and basically why the U.S. is one of the biggest, culprits in basically destroying this planet. Sorry if I'm ending it on a positive note. But it's interesting to me how, Ted and I have sort of gravitated toward caring about the same thing. I mean, I find that very fascinating. I'm approaching it totally differently because we're offline. I got to account for every single, pound of carbon I put into the world, and I can measure it. And we actually don't measure that. And we're not honest. There's no perpetual motion machine. To put in clean energy puts more carbon into the earth than basically it will ever save in its lifetime. So
now, let me add to that.
Yeah.
9 years ago, we put in a photovoltaic system on our property in Los Altos Hills. I look at it as a great investment. As a retiree, they say buy muni bonds, and what do you get? The equivalent of 3% or so after tax return. This is about the equivalent of a 13 to 14% tax-free return on net investment. Now, the one thing I would fault because of the PG&E's cost structure, we decided to go for about 80% of our electricity. Wouldn't it be better if the cost structure promoted us to do 120 to 150%, and we would be a net supplier of energy to our neighbors, and in a way that doesn't dump carbon dioxide into
So I'll add to that. we're going to go back and forth. Everything that, when you do comparisons like this, all these numbers are made up. We have the capability on our property to generate 3.3 million watts of energy. So I'm going to be a net supplier someday, but none of it makes sense. Why? So when you use power, it's artificially tier 1, tier 2 through tier 4. You basically get up to like 40 cents a kilowatt hour. That's all artificial. Try to sell it back to, the grid, and they'll only pay 6 cents a kilowatt hour, because that's the value when you're competing against coal, liquid, fuels,
Yeah.
and whatever's out there. Even our Mark Little, one of our trustees, who was the chief technical officer at GE, he said the most efficient wind turbine in the world is 10 cents a kilowatt hour when it's fully financed. And you just have to look at your bill, and you just start realizing like all this other, forms of, generation is artificial, because we basically put a value on it that actually you can't generate. If you wanted to basically see what's really going on, we should pay PG&E for distribution costs, 6 cents a kilowatt hour. And basically then we turn it over to eBay. So I will sell it to my neighbor, and, which is basically, he's right next door. So distribution is very low, but he's going to be buying it from me at 6 cents a kilowatt hour, because he could buy it from PG&E for the same price. So we're in this position, which is everything is artificial. All these numbers are made up. There's no perpetual motion machine, and all these things are being built over, like, let's say in China, so that they get our pollution, and we even export all our garbage over to them, called recyclables, which they put 90% into the, landfills. So we have to be very careful when we basically say we get great returns. Yes, in our society, when it's all it's all lies to begin with, we get really good returns. But if you want to do 3.3 megawatts and you want to do solar arrays or wind generators, you can't break even.
So I teach thermodynamics,
Yep.
and the first thing we teach our students is that there is no perpetual motion machine, right? So you're right about that. I want to end on a positive note, and that's not about. I'm not going to claim that there is a perpetual motion machine, but you read newspapers these days, and there's a feeling that the world is going downhill and things are collapsing, and yet, as the dean of engineering at RPI, I see very, very bright people on a daily basis. I interact with our students, and just like the two of you who have already changed the world, every day I interact with our students, it makes me more and more optimistic that we will find the right kind of solutions for these challenging problems that you've thrown at us. And so thank you very much for talking to us.
Why Not Change the World is typically recorded in MPAC, the Curtis R. Preem Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center. Thank you to the MPAC staff for their assistance, and thank you for listening.